with regards to your vocabulary list, I think I have about half the classes at this point. Let me double check here. Yeah, I got about half the class. You should hand that in. So if you haven't handed in your plants vocabulary list yet, ideally you do that right on the, when you finish up the content for the day, you add your last vocabulary words. It shouldn't be too hard to find 30. I can almost just name 30 off the top of my head, but just make sure that that's happening, preferably at some point today. So like that in the quiz, and then you'll be done that unit. So what we're gonna do now, and the presentation, which again, if you're finishing that today, no big deal. That's technically the due date is today at midnight, but today at midnight, tomorrow at midnight. I'm gonna start marking them today. So, I mean, ideally, I only have a few of them so far, but I don't want to leave it too late. So ideally here, like on Friday when you're finishing the course, I'd like to give you a mark update, preferably. I mean, it all depends on how many assignments I'm getting in on time. Hopefully all of them. So certainly by Monday, you should have a pretty good idea of how you've done in the course. Again, assuming that you've handed everything in on time. I'm not trying to surprise anybody, so with regards to late assignments, I should have contacted everybody at this point that owes me something, and to be perfectly honest, it's not that many people. So most people have everything in. Good for you. Good on you. Because I know it could be a real challenge. That we do move very quickly. If you are in the process of catching up and you need help with anything, I get a lot of radio silence. This is it's a weird situation because in the classroom, like I feel people would be more open to saying, oh hey, I'm not sure if this like looks right, like is this the right thing, am I supposed to include this or not include this? And then when we switch over to distance or even hybrid, when people are not in the room, or even when you are in the room, because we just talk less, people just don't say anything. They just kind of hold on to it, and maybe they just don't hand it in then because they're not sure if it's looking the way that they want it to look or the way it's supposed to look. I don't know. I'm not trying to get you. I'm never trying to get you. So like if you're not sure, like just please tell me. we could talk into Google Me. I bet you we could go through that assignment together. Yeah, everything figured out in, I don't know, a few minutes, and then you could feel comfortable with it. Or I think that's a problem for a lot of students. It has to do with like this weird like artificial distance here that people like don't feel comfortable talking about anything really. I must say I've certainly become less social just like sitting in my house all the time. I mean, I'm with my family a lot, but I don't know. It's probably not good like socially for people, I don't think. Anyway, we don't need to get too much in that. Let's talk about evolution. So our last unit here is a unit that sort of ties a bunch of the different things that we've been talking about through the semester together. So we've been talking about structures of living things. We're talking about structures of animals. We've been talking about structures of plants. And in general, in the first unit, we just talked about, in general, how organisms in general are structured. Prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and etc. And then in the genetics unit, we talked about like how those structures actually get built, at least at a basic level. We talked about the idea of you have a code, a genetic code, and then your ribosomes use that code to build structures, proteins, that are going to go on once you build them together. Once you put them together, are going to go on to build a larger, tissue, organism at the end. And so we talked about the connection between the microscopic, the cell and the DNA, and the macroscopic, the total organism. You build the proteins, and the proteins basically are what makes up the organism. So there's a connection between genetics and what you get at the end, the phenotype of the organism. this last unit is sort of why certain phenotypes exist. As in, why is the average length of an arm this long? You know, why does this species of bird have this? Why can this species of bird fly fast? Why can this species of bird, do whatever? Okay, all of these traits affect the survival of a species. If you have we'll compare like a duck and a chicken. Okay, and actually, chicken is a bad example because that's like a human engineered species. But like, what about a duck and a robin? Okay, and let's just look at their feet. So like a duck has web feet. Let me like pull up a little drawing thing here so I can draw while I talk. So, I mean, it's probably fairly obvious that ducks. Is this gonna work? Yep. The ducks. Oh my goodness! And now I'm gonna showcase how terrible my drawing skills are. It's probably pretty obvious that ducks and robins are related to each other. You probably knew that already. So, like a duck's foot kind of looks like this, and a robin's foot kind of looks like this. I mean, these are just size, not the scale. Okay. So the question is, why are they different? They both evolved from very similar dinosaurs. I don't know if you know that birds are evolved from a type of dinosaur, sauropod, a two-legged dinosaur, but they are physiologically different. They look different, but like, why are these various characteristics different? And it has to do with adaptation to their environment. This foot over here is adapted to, as you can probably already guess, swimming. It's great at pushing water around. This one's not so great at pushing water around. And so if you have a population of animals, of birds, and they are living an aquatic lifestyle, birds that have more webbing in their feet will swim better. And that's a genetic trait. So the reason that they have more webbing in their feet is because of a genetic mutation, so a difference in their DNA. And if that difference in their DNA allows them to survive better and reproduce better, well, the next generation of ducks is going to have more members like that. It's going to have more members with that genetic mutation. And you know what? Maybe the mutation is not full webbing, okay? Maybe let's say that their feet started out fairly similar, okay, like this. But maybe there was a mutation that showed up in the duck population that, changed the webbing in their feet a little bit, like that, added a little bit of webbing between the toes. You may even have seen people that have webbed feet. So that's a trait that you can find, a genetic trait in humans as well. Okay, it's not advantageous for humans to survive, but okay, so let's say that shows up in the population, a random mutation. Okay, that the offspring of that duck will have an advantage over time. They can swim better. They live in an aquatic environment. It's easier for them to catch their prey, or I don't know exactly what ducks eat, but whatever they need to catch, it's going to provide an advantage. So the next generation, the ones that have this mutation are more likely to have offspring that survive, because this is useful. Okay, so the environment here is selecting, because it's an aquatic environment. It's selecting for this trait. It's saying this is good. This trait is good. If a robin, which is a terrestrial animal, okay, gets the same mutation, okay, a little bit of webbing in the feet, this provides no advantage to a robin. They're not swimming, and so this is nothing. This mutation could show up in the robin population, but in this case, the environment is not going to select for that mutation because it doesn't offer any kind of advantage. And so in the next generation, if you have this, that's not going to make you more likely to survive or reproduce as a robin. So the environment is not going to select for that. And in the next generation, after this generation, okay, so like this one has offspring, its offspring are not going to be more likely to survive than any other configuration. And in fact, it may actually take more resources to build this webbing than it does to build a regular foot, in which case it's actually worse for the survival of the robin. It reduces its survivability, which also can happen with a mutation. That's called a negative mutation. Okay, so in that case, the webbing on the feet is being selected against by the environment. And it's important here to note that the environment is what's doing the selecting. It's the conditions in the environment. That's why the selection that we're going to talk about today, that's today's topic, is natural selection. The natural part is nature doing the selective process. Okay, it's choosing what is going to be selected for or against. So in the case of the robin here, its feet are being selected against webbing. And in the case of the duck, anytime we have a mutation that increases the webbing, let's say maybe there's another generation where there's more webbing on the feet, this has an even better advantage than the previous iteration. And maybe that's only another small genetic change to the already existing webbing on the feet. And now this particular group, whoever has this genetic mutation, would have higher survivability and would be more likely to pass their genes on. And so what you can see over time is that traits that are beneficial with random mutation are over time going to change and make the organism more adapted to their environment, assuming that there is diversity in the population. Okay, so if there's no diversity, if there's no genetic diversity, and every single duck has this foot, okay, no webbing, well, evolution can't act on that if there's no diversity in the population. So we previously discussed a lot when we talked about sexual reproduction, this idea that diversity equals survival. And that's the reason. Because if you have traits that are going to increase your survivability, didn't mean to do that. If you have a trait that's going to increase your survivability, in other words, there's diversity in the population where one or a few members can more easily survive than others, well, that's going to lead to your population changing over time. It's going to favor those individuals that can survive better. And maybe over 100 generations, 1,000 generations. Interesting question. So when you say the word deformation, that's like an aesthetic term. So sorry, just so you guys know, the chat here, Tamer asks, what if it began as a deformation? Okay, that's an aesthetic term. That a deformation just means like something that we don't find aesthetically pleasing, like we don't like it. But like nature doesn't care about aesthetics. It doesn't care how good things look to humans. It only cares about whether it's going to increase your survival or not. Now it does care about whether mates of the same species will find it attractive. Because if you can't mate with a member of your species, then that's going to reduce your survivability, and because you're not going to be able to pass your genes on to your offspring. So in that case, but that's not really what I don't think what you're asking, Tamer. So like, for example, let's say that you're in nature and I don't know. Let me think of a weird example here. Okay, you got a bear. Oh, this is going to be a hideous bear. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm not an artist. Oh. No, this is terrible. Oh. Don't know what I'm doing here. This is supposed to be a bear, okay? Oh, that's scary. That looks like some kind of a cat or something. I should just quit. Okay, a bear. Jeez. Oh no. So sorry. That is horrible. Okay, that's supposed to be a bear. Anyway, let's say you had an organism like this bear. Ugh. And the next generation of bear, it grew like a hump on its back. Okay? Okay, this is what I mean as a human. You would call this like a deformation, I'm assuming, Tamer. Okay? So, this really depends on the environment. So, if in the bear population, if you had this hump, if this confers no advantage to you as a bear, like you're less attractive to male bears or female bears, depending on your sex as a bear, or you maybe you can't hunt as well or something like that, that's a negative mutation, okay? It reduces your survivability and ability to have offspring, and that is going to be selected against. That means the next generation that has this trait is going to be less likely to survive, and it'll probably die out. However, if this confers some type of advantage to the bear. Like, for example, when it runs into another bear, this is scary. Okay, maybe this is like when a bear like tries to make itself big, you know, to like scare away other bears. Like, oh, this is my territory. I'm gonna make myself really big. And like this hump is like, oh, that's so much more bear for me to contend with. I don't wanna have a fight with that bear. Whatever. If that happens, and that actually makes you more survivable, then this is a positive trait. Then nature is selecting for hump, okay? And that means that in the future, more offspring with this trait are going to be more likely to survive. So we would call that a deformation. But like nature doesn't care if it looks good. It only cares whether it increases the survivability of an organism. So, I mean, there are traits out there, certainly in organisms, where you would say like, that looks gross. I mean, like there's slugs that vomit up their entire digestive tract all over the place. It looks gross. And then they kind of like suck it back in again. And then that's how they like feed. That's very aesthetically unpleasing to look at, but it's an effective feeding strategy. And it's different than probably the previous slug. And so nature selected for that. Now, it's interesting with humans because humans do care about aesthetics. We care about what our partners look like. And so in some ways, in many ways, physical abnormalities, at least historically, are selected against in the human population because people with deformities, or what you would call a deformity, Tamer, like a physical difference, are less likely to survive and reproduce, at least historically. I mean, I don't know if we've completely evolved beyond that as a society. And I'm talking about social evolution here, not physical evolution. But historically, that's been true for humans. And that's where the idea of aesthetics even comes from. This idea that culturally, we believe that there's like a certain look that is more desirable than another look. Right. And that's not totally unique to humans. So a lot of species have that. Bears, I'll go back to my bear example here. It's quite possible that having a change like this is going to make this bear less attractive to another bear. Let's say this is a male bear. A female bear might look at this and say, that indicates low genetic quality. That's like an indicator that I am not I'm not going to be a good partner as a bear. Okay, so if that's true, this will be selected again. That's called sexual selection. We're going to get that. We're going to talk about sexual selection separate at the end. But sorry, that's the general idea here. Okay, this idea that nature does the selecting. Nature picks what is useful, what is going to allow you to survive and reproduce better, and it's also going to choose to select against things that reduce your survivability. Okay, and that's Darwin's idea. Okay, this idea of natural selection, descent with modification, the idea that in each generation, the best, and by best I just mean most survivable individuals in a population are going to pass on their traits to the subsequent population. And so the whole year sort of has been leading up to this idea. We talked about how genetics influence your phenotype, what you physically look like. And now we're talking about how the environment acts on those phenotypes and chooses the genetics and picks which genetics are going to get passed on to the subsequent generation. Okay, so it's kind of all coming together here. So before we get too deep into this idea of natural selection, did I answer your question, by the way, Tamer? Hopefully I did. And it's also true, by the way, Tamer, going back to your question just really quickly here, that something that may start off as a small benefit to an organism, a minor benefit, and doesn't really look like much, may later on become a great benefit by having a slight modification, a change to it. So a great example of that is the idea of eyes. Okay, so believe it or not, organisms on Earth, multicellular organisms, didn't always have light-sensitive structures. But if you can imagine, if you got a bunch of cells and there's lots of great videos on this. I may actually add a video about this specifically later. But let's say you're a multicellular organism, an early multicellular blob. Okay. If through random mutation, one of these cells becomes light sensitive. Okay, so all of a sudden you get a cell in there that becomes light sensitive in this multicellular organism. Doesn't have directionality, doesn't know the direction of the light source or anything. Just one cell in your multicellular structure, or maybe all the cells, due to random mutation, are able to know when light is or is not shining on it. Okay, that may confer a small advantage to this organism. Maybe not a lot. Okay, maybe being able to detect whether or not there is light can help it decide when to move or not to move, or when to produce a specific enzyme or not produce a specific enzyme. And if that exists, there is an advantage conferred by just having a light sensitive cell, then that will be selected for. Okay, so that's not an eye, but it's just a light sensitive cell. A subsequent mutation to that would be, what if your multicellular organism had a group of light sensitive cells, and this is only 1 or 2 mutations away from this, a group of light sensitive cells. Okay, a group of light sensitive cells, maybe that confers a better advantage than a single light sensitive cell, again depending on the circumstances for that organism. So maybe you end up having an organism with multiple light sensitive cells. What if there's another mutation that causes the light sensitive cells to be in sort of a bowl configuration? Okay, that it doesn't even have to be much of a dip where you find those light sensitive cells. Okay, so same organism, but now the area, due to a random mutation, has a bit of a dip in it. Once you add a dip to an area of light sensitive cells, all of a sudden you can use that, the organism can use that to detect the direction of the light that's incoming. Okay, in other words, some cells in the dipped area are going to receive more light than others, and from that the organism can potentially determine what direction the light is coming from. That confers probably another selective advantage to the organism. So now we've gone just in small steps here from a simple light sensitive cell to a group of light sensitive cells to a slight dip in a group of light sensitive cells. And this is a number, I mean, this is obviously far away from an eye. An eye is a very complex structure, but you can see how incrementally, and again, I can post a video of this that talks about the various increments along the way from light sensitive structure to eye. But you can see how through one small change at a time, each structure is more useful than the last. Through random mutation, eventually you can get a complex structure built out of those small changes in a row. And pretty much all of the complexity that you see in the natural world is built like that. It's an incremental change over an extremely long time period. The other thing that is really difficult to wrap our heads around is when we're talking about these changes over time, we're talking about millions and billions of years. Okay? Life has been on Earth for a while, a couple billion years. And when you say billion, people are like, oh, well, billion. That's a long time. Okay. That's a long time. Maybe we'll do an activity later in the unit with this. We'll see if it's a good idea. But it's really hard for us to think of the time scale of life on Earth because it's so long. We don't really have a good way of thinking about it. But if you look at human history is only about since we evolved as a current species, Homo sapiens sapiens, and we're going to get into this in more detail on the last day, or maybe Wednesday, Thursday. I can't remember which day is human evolution. Thursday, I think. You will see that our time on Earth as a species is only a fraction, a small, tiny fraction, 1/100,000th of the total time that organisms have been on Earth. Okay, a really, really small amount of time humans have been around, and that's everything. That's everything humans have ever done. And it's really hard for us to conceptualize how long life has really been on Earth and how long species have been evolving. Anyway, we would come back to that, but it's a long time. So it's all about incremental change. So before we really get into the meat and potatoes of this, even though I kind of did that already, but before I get us to examine this in more detail, I want us to look at the idea of what a theory is. And you may have talked about this in another science class, maybe in grade 9. Some teachers do this in grade 9. But you hear the term theory thrown around in public speaking all the time. People say, oh, it's just a theory, or this is my theory on this. But we don't really talk a lot about what a scientific theory is. And the word theory in science is a lot different than what it means when you say I have a theory. I have a theory about who stole the cookies. This is like that's not the same thing as a scientific theory. So part of the problem here is that the public understanding of what the word theory means is let's just say in general people don't understand what the word theory means. Not at least how it's applied in science. Okay? So certainly we are going to discuss the theory of evolution, but I want people to be very clear on what a scientific theory is. Because really what it means is a hypothesis that has usually a ton of evidence. Okay, there has to be a lot of evidence for it in order for it to become an established scientific theory. And in the case of evolution, there isn't a gigantic mountain of evidence. It would be, in every area of biology, the mountain is high. There's a lot of evidence for evolution. And because of the way theories work, when we find disconfirming evidence that doesn't show that a particular part of the theory of evolution is correct, we modify it. That's the entire purpose of science, is that you change the theory when you find disconfirming evidence. So anyway, I'll let you guys watch this video. So it's a great introduction into the difference between what is a theory, what is a law in science. It's really important for you guys to understand the difference between those terms and what that means. Okay, so and you're going to hear this all the time. This will come up in university a million times if you're going to university, but especially if you're going to the sciences. But anyway, really important for you to know the difference between these things, especially when we in the context of evolution. Okay, and then I got a second video here that talks about what is some of that evidence. So that this is only a short video, but because obviously they can't talk about all the evidence for evolution. It would take us days and days and days to go over all that stuff. But a brief overview of some of the lines of evidence of evolution. So how do we know that this descent with modification, this small changes over time, is an actual thing and has happened on Earth and is happening, by the way, is continuing to happen? Because it seems a little bit outlandish. Certainly for most of human history, people didn't think that was a thing that happened. But anyway, some lines of evidence. Okay, so this is a little video that goes through the lines of evidence of evolution. And then there's a short reading here about sort of the history of evolution. It's chapter 7.4, page 296 to 303. And this just goes through the origins of the evolution, the theory of evolution. Okay, where did it come from and what is it? All right, it's fairly straightforward. It's not like meiosis. It's not like a complex process, but it is good to know what the general idea is here that we're going to be examining. Okay, so that's chapter 7.4. As you're going through there, you should add things to your vocabulary list, and we're going to try something new. So before you actually do that reading, I should have put this in a different order. I meant to do this in a different order. I have two other videos here, and these two videos may be the two things that you take away from this course. Okay, if you're not going into biology, obviously. If you're going into biology, you'll probably revisit everything that you learned in this course, probably some of those things in great detail. However, if you're going to university and you're going to physics or chemistry or something like that, or any professional school, business school, whatever, you're going to need to take good notes. Okay, and it's a skill. Reading a textbook and going through and actually taking your own notes from the textbook is a skill. And to be perfectly honest, we just don't do that very often. I don't think I almost ever did it until I went to university, and I suddenly had to do it, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I wish this video exists. YouTube didn't even exist when I went to university, or at least not in its current form. But these two videos here, and at least watch the first one. The second one is okay. You don't have to watch the second one, but it talks about some strategies for how to actually take a note from what you're reading in a textbook, what to look for, how to summarize, how to lay out your notes. Okay. And for some, like I said, for some of you that aren't going to go on in biology, this may be the only thing that you get from this course that you actually use, but it is extremely useful information. So I highly, highly recommend that you watch these guys. I wish I had watched these videos before I went to university. And then once you do that, take a note. Okay. So when you read textbook chapter 7.4, actually try and take a legit note from chapter 7.4, your own notes, and try and synthesize the knowledge from chapter 7.4. Okay, we haven't really done this together, but this is absolutely a skill. And like I said, if you're going to university, it's basically an essential skill. Any professional school, if you want to have any hope of doing well, you have to be able to do this. So you know what? Let's get some practice. Let's try it. Okay? Maybe it won't be the best note you've ever made. Maybe you're already good at this. I don't know. Likely not, but I don't know. Maybe you do this in other courses. I actually have seen some students study notes and they're amazing, so I shouldn't say that. Some people clearly do know how to do this already, but I don't think you ever directly go over how to anywhere. Maybe you do. It hasn't been my experience, but okay. Anyway, so try making a note from the textbook. Again, and this is just basic information about evolution. Okay, and the idea of natural selection. Once you've done that, you should be making a new document for questions. That's for the evolution unit. I don't know if you guys noticed, but at the top here of the evolution, on the sidebar here of the evolution unit, there is a entry here called Homework Questions Portfolio. A number of students have been asking me about when this portfolio is going to show up. So this is where you're going to submit all of your homework documents from the semester. Okay? Preferably, you would hand them in on Friday when you're done all the content for the course and you're done all the homework questions. I'm not actually sure if there are homework questions on Friday. There might not be. I have to double check that. But Saturday at the latest, guys, because actually I have to assess all of these. I got to read over all the questions that you wrote for the semester. It's going to take me a long time. So so please, no later than Saturday. But this isn't like an extra thing. It's not like this isn't more work for you to do. Ideally, you've already done the homework questions. So all you're doing here is just handing in what you've done. If you've missed homework questions here and there, that's fine. Okay. When I look through these, I mean, I'm not assuming everybody's done every homework question from literally everything we've covered. I mean, ideally you have. That would be the idea. But I mean, realistically, not everybody has done every homework question. But you hand in what you have. Okay. So let me just quickly show you what the assignment looks like. So it mentions on here that you are going to hand in one file per unit. Okay? That's what we talked about at the beginning. You're creating a new file that contains all of your homework questions for each unit. A number of people asked me at the very beginning, what if I just have one file? Okay, that's fine. I mean, ideally, I would prefer if you had one for each unit. It's much easier for me to keep track of it. But if you do have one file, that's not a big deal. However, more than one file per unit is not okay. So if you have 50 files, that's not fine. I'm not gonna look through 50 files. So please, it should be one file per unit. Okay. If you did your homework questions on paper, and I mentioned this way back at the beginning of the year, you just need to take a quick pic and then just pop it in a Google Doc or whatever. Okay. But please don't hand in 50 pictures, separate files. I simply won't be able to look at all of those. I have to load each one separately, and by the time I get that figured out, forget about it. So what has just happened here? Oh, iPad. What you doing to me? What's going on? Sorry guys, give me 2 seconds here. There we go. Okay, so one file per unit. Hit submit. If you're looking for the rubric, why can I not look at the rubrics when I open this? I know you're able to look at them, but for some reason, it doesn't show it on my end. Is it here? No. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, there is a rubric. You should be able to view the rubric. It's attached. And it basically is just one spot per unit. Did you complete all the questions? Are they in full solution format, like full sentences? And then it's like a sliding scale, okay? And I use this to determine at the end of the semester your responsibility, which is basically homework completion. It's, are you doing the work regularly for the course and on time? I also look for the responsibility section on whether or not you're handing stuff in relatively on time for the course, although I realize it's more of a struggle this year than most, so I mean, I'm a little bit flexible there. But and also on your independent work. So are you actually doing the work independently at home? That is a little bit difficult for me to assess other than through your assignments. And so then this is a good gauge for me. Are you doing the work at home? I'm not with you. So so again, you just hand in what you have. This is not meant to be an extra assignment. This is just meant to be handing in what you have already done. So realistically, like if you didn't do any of the homework, just write that in the comments. You know, homework, didn't do any. Submit. Okay, then I know. So I'm not expecting people to go back and do all the homework from the year. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you have done it, and then in which case you just attach what you've done and submit. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. This isn't meant to be like an extra thing. So, but I am gonna, like I said, I've mentioned it a number of times through the semester that I am gonna collect your homework. So, okie doke. So that's learning block 1, theory versus law. Basics of evolution, okay, what is the evidence for, and we're going to work on this idea of taking notes, okay? Then there's an exit quiz at the end, just to check on your understanding from that stuff that you just read. Second part of today, natural selection. This is the idea that I was just talking about, okay? This idea that so the homework completion is used to assess learning skills. That is correct. That is correct. And that is how things have always worked in this course. Ella, what I've done traditionally is every day that you had homework, I would just walk around and check your homework. And then I keep a log for the entire semester on homework completion. And I also make anecdotal notes watching students complete work in class. I was doing that until we got sent away here. So I do have some data on that already, on what people were working on. However, the hybrid learning model, and certainly this model, makes it basically impossible for me to follow along what you're doing at home. So I got to improvise a little bit. So this is the strategy that I'm going to use instead. Hopefully that answered your question. Right, natural selection. So this is the idea that nature does the selecting. It picks what is going to be the best, okay, the most survivable, okay? So when we say survival of the fittest, that's like the evolution slogan. The fittest, what is the most fit, is selected by nature. Nature picks what is the fittest, not necessarily based on aesthetics. So, watch this video. Summarizes natural selection. Copy this document. This is a lab, okay? So it's a Gizmos lab. You go to explorelearning.com. Ooh, I better go to Explore Learning. I have to make sure I actually added this to your list of gizmos for today. I'll have to go and quickly check that out right after I'm done talking here. I'm pretty sure I added it. I'll double check. So it's gonna lead you through the gizmo step by step. The gizmo is called evolution, mutation, and selection, and what it does is show you an example of natural selection in action. Let me see if maybe I can pull it up on here. I don't know if it works on my iPad. Let's see if it does. I might be able to do it on here. Wait a second. Yeah, oh yeah, you guys are on here. You guys are section 2. Yeah. So I do have to add it. Okay, I'll add it in a second. Here it is in my other class. Does it work on my iPad? Oh, it does work. Perfect. Okay, so what you're going to be looking at here is a population of beetles. Okay, and when we're talking about whether they're going to be selected for or against, this demonstration, this simulation, only looks at one aspect of their survivability, and that is, do they stand out to predators? Okay, and that is one aspect of your survivability. So in this case, you have to assume here that there are a number of genes that are going to determine the color of a particular bug, okay, this bug. And those genes are going to alter the amount of pigment in the bug's shell carapace, okay? So maybe there's production of a red pigment, a green pigment, and a blue pigment, and different genetics are going to increase the amount of each of these three pigments that are made, okay? So over time, you're going to get random changes to the pigment in these beetles, okay? So if you look over time, there we go. Next generation, you will notice that not all of the beetles are the same, okay? There is diversity because this is a sexually reproducing organism, and so, and there's also been maybe random mutations that are occurring. You can increase or decrease the mutation rate. It's one of the sliders. In nature, these natural random mutations, changes to the DNA, happen all the time, and they are absolutely necessary for evolution to happen because you do need changes to occur in the population for new traits to appear. Okay, so you'll notice that the different beetles there are not hugely different from the other beetles. Okay, they're slightly different, and that change to their color could potentially be beneficial. In other words, it allows them to hide better from predators, or it could be deleterious. It could be detrimental. In other words, it makes it harder for them to hide from predators. So if the change makes them better at hiding from predators, they're going to be less likely to be eaten and more likely to pass on their genes to the next generation. If they're easier to be eaten by predators, they're more visible, then they're less likely to pass their genes on to the next generation. So nature is going to select. Now, if it selects for a particular trait, let's say that beetle right in the middle there ends up having more survivability. It doesn't look like it here, but let's say it's more survivable, okay? The next generation is going to have more of those beetles than the other ones because its offspring are going to survive better than the other beetles, okay? And then in the subsequent generation, there will be even more of those. And mutations will continue to happen to that beetle and its offspring. And if those mutations make it more camouflaged, easier for it to hide, then those will be selected for. So you can see that over time, if you keep selecting for mutations that make you more camouflaged, well, eventually you're going to end up with a beetle that is a completely different color, because even though the changes are very small in pigment, over a long period of time, this is going to lead to a large difference in adaptation. Okay, and you can it's going to demonstrate that for you. It's going to go through over time, small mutations, selected for, selected against. Because what it does here is then it has like a little bird fly by and be like, all right, and it eats the most visible to the bird. Okay, and then the least visible beetles will remain. That's natural selection. This is a simulation of that exact thing. Okay, so as you're going through this, there are some questions and stuff that you do. They're all on the document right here. So it actually walks you through exactly what you're supposed to do with the gizmo. You know, do this, watch this, you know, think about this. Okay, so it's pretty clear. It walks you through it. But as you go through, that's what it's trying to get at. Okay, so it's a demonstration of that concept, and basically showing you in real time what that looks like. Okay, so that's the idea. So you're going to do sort of this demonstration of natural selection, which is the basis for evolution. And then the last little part here is this little Amoeba Sisters video on natural selection. This goes through some examples in nature of natural selection in action. It shows you some examples of, for example, like the pepper moth, which is a real life example of how more camouflaged insects are going to have higher survivability. Okay, so there's a lot of real world examples of these, but that's just one. Okay, so that second video there, you don't necessarily have to watch this one. I highly recommend it. It gives some great examples. It also makes what's happening in the gizmo a lot clearer because it uses an example in it that is, I would say, basically the exact same example as what's used in the gizmo. So and then it explains that example quite well. So I highly recommend this one. But you don't necessarily have to watch this, especially you already watched this natural selection video. Just this one has a really good example that directly applies to the lab activity. Okay, it really makes the lab activity clear. And then at the end, once you're done the gizmo, there is a little quiz at the bottom of the gizmo. So this is instead of doing the little check-in quiz that I have at the end of most sections. The one underneath the gizmo is actually a really good one. It goes over all the stuff about natural selection that we just did together. And so I highly recommend that. So do that one. That's like a self-check. So remember, guys, that as you're doing those little quizzes, those exit quizzes, if it goes well, okay, good. I mean, that's fine. That means that you're comfortable with the content, you know what's up, okay? Or if you look through your answers and you understand why they're wrong, you're like, oh, yeah, I got that wrong. Right. This is how this works. Fine. That's fine. But if you're going through the exit quizzes and you're like, I don't know why this is wrong, you should say something. Okay, that's the whole purpose of the exit quizzes. It's like to send up a little flag and be like, I better either look this up or I better ask a question about this because I don't understand how this works. So that's going to accumulate, right? And then when you end up on the quiz at the end, blah, 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 nothing makes sense. So please use, that's the entire purpose of this. I can't sit beside you here. So if you're coming across questions here that don't make sense, you don't understand them, please ask. Okay, so anyway, first half here, we're going to be looking at this stuff. Boy, I've talked for a long time again. And then the second half here, we're going to be looking at this natural selection demo. The lab doesn't take too long, probably about 45 minutes if you're going at a good pace. So hopefully during Learning Block 3, you'll have time for writing that quiz. Okay, if you, as usual, I will be here all day. Ask questions in the chat, send me an email. We can jump into a Google Meet. I did that with a number of people yesterday. And then during Learning Block 3, as always, I will be just sitting in a Google Meet between 1 and 2:05. Drop by anytime, and we can chat about anything. I will take up these homework questions at the beginning of tomorrow if people would like me to. And don't forget that I will be checking in at 11:05 for attendance, and we will do our 10 minutes of meditation if you're interested. I found it useful yesterday. Okay, guys, I'm going to stop talking now. That's been too much of that, and I'll let you get to work here, okay? Let me know if you need anything. Okay. So before we move on to the work from the next block, and I'm going to do our 10 minutes of meditation. Before we get into that, does anybody have any questions from the first half? So that would be questions on theory versus law, evidence for evolution, information from chapter 7.4. I suppose questions about making study notes, although that's fairly straightforward, I think, if you watch the videos. Or any of the questions potentially from page 303, 2, 4, 6, and 7. Let me know. If questions come up later, if you haven't gotten to page 303, 2, 4, 6, 7. Oh, question 2. All right, let's take a quick look. Textbook. Okay, so the question 2 is basically saying, okay, at some point, a frog species was introduced to an island. Okay, and previous to that, there was no frog species on the island, and now that frog species has basically taken over. It's an invasive species. It has no natural predators, and now it's posing a threat to a number of natural species. This kind of stuff happens all the time. We were having a problem here with the emerald ash borer, still are, but like things like invasive species like this are problematic all the time. So the question here is, why are there no native frog species on the islands to begin with? In other words, like, why were there no frog species before this species arrived? And this goes back to the idea of like where species come from. So the reason that there are frog species here where we live is that the ancestors of those frogs were here, and the ancestors to those frogs were here, and the species that frogs evolved from was here. So in other words, like we all come from our ancestors. And so if there was no ancestor species to a frog in that area, then there would be no modern frog there. And this question is sort of getting this idea in a weird way. It's like saying, why are there no kangaroos in North America? That's the same question. And the answer is that the precursor to the kangaroo, we don't have that here either. And before that, its precursor, its ancestor, also not here. And so, because evolution is iterative, there's no previous iteration of the frog on that island, and so there's no current iteration of a frog on that island. Now, it's true that migration could have led to one of those ancestors arriving at a particular place. Like, for example, we could have had an ancestor to kangaroos because it migrated here at some point in previous history. However, Australia is an island, and so it actually has a number of species that are only local to Australia because they just simply haven't had an opportunity to migrate to the surrounding area. Not since Australia was separated as a landmass in Earth's geological history. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this. In fact, I think I may have discussed it in the chapter that you just read. But Earth, the continents of Earth were more or less one landmass at a certain point in Earth's geological history. That landmass is called Pangaea. And then over time, due to tectonic shift, the continents separated from one another, some not fully separated, so some are still connected by land. But once that separation occurred, and especially for terrestrial animals that can't easily move from one landmass to another, like over large bodies of water, once that separation happened, if you had no particular precursor species in your geological area, well, then you're not going to have any iterations of that species. There may be similar species that inhabit those niches. So, for example, there are a number of marsupials in Australia that inhabit the same niches as what we would have here, like mice, rats, and things like that. There are marsupials that have the same niche. They do the same ecological role, again, because of evolution, because they've evolved to fill in a certain niche, to consume a certain type of prey, to be consumed by a certain type of predator, to inhabit a certain habitat. They've evolved, but their precursors were just different precursors. Now, subsequent to that, Australia has had an introduction of rats, which caused an insane problem in Australia. They had an issue with the cane toad being introduced to Australia, which again caused an insane problem. So they still have an insane problem with cane toads, which is a non-native species that is outcompeting local species. But that's only because they just started with different precursors. They started with different ancestors, and so then the modern species that are there are different. There's a more consistent distribution of species, for example, across North America and South America, because those are connected by land, and so like there's widespread migration, or at least there was at one point widespread migration between the continents, and so there's a great deal of shared species ancestry across the continents. And to some extent, we've introduced species, between Europe and North America and things like that due to trade, accidental introduction of species. But anyway, so what that question is trying to get at is the reason that there was no frogs there previous is because they just simply, when that landmass split off from whatever larger continent a long time ago in geological history, the ancestor to frogs wasn't there. So if the ancestor's not there, then you're not going to get the current frog there. Can we also go up question 6? Sure. Question 6 is saying, describe the evidence of evolution revealed by the embryonic development of different species. So this is referencing this idea of homologous structures, similar structures, but that have different purposes. So going back, what page is that on? It's on page 298. Where it talks about homologous features. Does it actually discuss? I can't remember if it discusses embryology specifically in here. It's got to be in here. Second. Oh, I thought there was a section on embryology in here. Is it in the section on homologous features? Yes, it is actually. It's on page 299. There we go. So essentially here, if you look at the early embryological development of different species, you notice that there are features that are the same. For example, if you look at an early embryo of a human or a fish or a dog, I mean, embryologically, early in development, they are identical. They all have gills. Even the human has gills. And the reason that there are these homologous structures that are the same between them is because we share a common ancestor. The genes that are responsible for the early development of embryos are the same across all mammals and across aves, birds as well. So we see things like, again, like I mentioned, gill slits. That gill slit structure is present even in humans in early embryological development. Now, it doesn't become gills in a mature human because that's part of the genetic differences between the two species. But the genes that are used for early embryological development between all mammals, fish, birds, and a number of animal groups, phylums, are the same because we share the genes for those things, for that early embryological development. And the only reason that we would have the exact same genes for early embryological development is because we have a common ancestor with them. And so we know in general what these genes are, but if you actually look at the embryos, and there's a picture of it on page 299, they look really, really similar early in embryological development. Now, obviously, if you go outside of the animal kingdom and you start looking at, the embryos of whatever, plant embryos or whatever, obviously there's significant structural differences. You can't see similarities between them. But within the animal kingdom, there is and again, not across the entire kingdom, because obviously things like sponges and things like that don't have similar embryological development. But in a lot of the animal phylums, there are homologs, genetic homologs, and structural homologs that are the same between various species, even species that are very different in maturity, like between fish and humans. So we share a lot of the genetics there and a lot of the structural characteristics early in embryological development. And again, because we share a common ancestry. So that similarity is the reason that is demonstrating or is used as a line of evidence for evolution. Because really, there is no proposed mechanism for why we would share those things in the animal kingdom unless we had a common ancestry. There's no other explanation, at least that is supported by any other evidence. So, so that evidence seems to directly point to a common ancestry. Hopefully I answered your question, Jack. Are there any other questions from page 303, or I'll wait for a second. Okay, hopefully I answered those questions. If not, please let me know. So before we get into the stuff for learning block 2, which is based on it's looking at natural selection, this concept of natural selection in more detail. Okay, cool. And again, we'll always at the beginning of each day have an opportunity to ask questions from the previous day too, so we can cover that if you guys have any additional questions at that time as well. The document is there. Oh, this is why I want to put this up on the screen. Sorry. There we go. So you'll need this document. Right here is the, oh, of course, I forgot to add. Let me just do that real quick here. I've got to add the evolution gizmo to your list of gizmos. Give me 2 shakes. Now it should be there. Yeah. Okay. So now the gizmo's available to you. So you should be able to find that when you log into Explore Learning. You'll need to go through with this document. I highly recommend this video first because it does a good job of summarizing how natural selection works before you get started. And the second video here, again, not essential. But it does give some really good examples in nature of natural selection at work, and one of them is very similar to the one that's shown in the lab, and it kind of it does a good job of explaining the simulation a little bit. So I recommend this one, but you don't have to watch the second video if you don't want to. And then there's a quiz that is underneath the gizmo, which I highly recommend that you try. Okay, so I'm going to go through and do the. So if you're not interested in doing the meditation, which is totally fine, you can start the content. You can mute this if you'd like, and start the content for block 2. If you'd like to try the meditation, I'm going to put that on now. I highly recommend it, and you will find, or at least I've found. I guess I can't guarantee this for everybody, but it does help with your state of mind if you do it regularly. Anyway, at least I've found that it does. I don't take a lot of moments to just gather myself and be in the moment, as opposed to just doing the next task. And honestly, I found it really calming. So if people are interested, we're going to do that now. The quiz said that a bat wing was not analogous to a palm leaf. That's right. In order for a structure to be analogous, they have to have the same function. So, for example, a bat wing would be analogous to a bird wing. Those two things are not from a shared common ancestor. Bats and birds did not have a common ancestor with wings. So they independently evolved wings. And the same thing would be true a bat wing and a butterfly wing. Those are analogous structures because they have the same function, but they didn't evolve from the same source. So So those are analogous structures. Homologous structures are structures that have the same function, but did come from the same source. Or actually, they don't even have to have the same function. They just have the same relative structure, and they came from a common ancestor. So, for example, whales have a hip bone, which is strange. They don't have rear legs or anything, but they still have the hip bone and all the connections for a potential rear leg. They have little leg bones and stuff that are completely extraneous, and that's a homologous feature to human legs. It's the same leg bone, same hip bone, because we have a common ancestor, common mammalian ancestor, but they don't necessarily have the same function. They don't necessarily look exactly the same, but the structures are similar, and because of a shared common ancestry. So the reason that the bat wing and the palm leaf are not analogous is because they don't have the same function. They aren't both wings. The palm leaf is completely different structure to the bat wing. It doesn't have any analogy to it at all. They're not. They have no similar purpose. Did that answer your question, Fiacre? Hopefully. I have got to get the latency figured out on this connection. This makes things quite difficult. Okay, I'm going to assume that I answered your question, and if I didn't, please let me know. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's try the meditation now. Again, if you're interested. If not, you can mute. Move on. Just set up here. Sorry, guys. I had it set up. I think it logged me out. All right, here we go.
So as you just take a moment or two to get comfortable, just setting up the exercise with the eyes open. Without moving the eyes, make sure you can see the space around you, either side, above, below. And just maintaining a very soft focus. Just beginning with some big deep breaths, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. And as you breathe out this time, just closing the eyes, allowing the breath to return to its natural rhythm. Beginning to feel the weight of the body pressing down and different points of contact. Just settling into that space. And beginning to notice different sounds around you, just allowing those sounds to come and go. And bringing the attention back to the body now. Noticing any sense of heaviness or lightness in the body. Noticing if the body feels at all restless or perhaps particularly still right now. And then starting at the top of the head, just scanning down through the body, all the way down from head to toe. And as you become more aware of the body in general, starting to notice the breath, the movement of breath. Begin with just in a very general way, noticing which parts of the body move, that rising and falling sensation. And continuing to follow that movement. Beginning to notice each and every breath. Noticing if the breath's long or short. Following each in-breath and each out-breath. And as you continue to follow each breath, just to help maintain that focus, just counting the breaths as they pass, realizing when the mind's wandered, each time just returning to that sensation. So as soon as you realize the mind's wandered, just gently coming back to the breath each time. And now letting go of that focus, just for a moment, allowing the mind to be free. And as you bring the attention back to the body now, just coming back to that feeling of weight, of contact, coming back to the space around you, the sounds, the smells, just becoming more familiar. That space, the way you feel, posture. And then when you're ready, in your own time, you can just gently open the eyes again.
I hope that was helpful for people a little bit. Please let me know as you're going through the lab if you have any questions. You're like, I don't get what this is asking. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this spot. Post in the chat, or you can drop me an email. I am keeping close track of both of those things. Okay, and if not, if you're good to go for this, and or if you want to drop in, visit me during the Google Meet in Block 3. I will be here. I look forward to talking to you. Okay.